Gun-Free South Africa wants the police minister's gun amnesty program to succeed, and they know just how we should go about it. The organisation says the opportunity for citizens to hand over illegal firearms with no questions asked will go a long way in lowering gun-related crimes. Now, for more on the story, we're joined now by Adele Kirsten of Gun-Free SA. Thanks very much, Adele, for coming into studio.
Thanks, Michelle.
So, talk to us about the important, and I suppose it's more effective depending on where you are in the country. I'm thinking of the Cape Flats as a case in point.
So you're raising an important point, which is that gun violence looks different in different parts of the country. The number of weapons, and we know from crime stats that it's KZN, Western Cape and Gauteng. So that's where we have the highest levels of gun-related crime. But one of the key conditions for an amnesty is the full amnesty, which means no questions asked. To date, South Africa has never run that kind of amnesty. So under our law, amnesty means indemnity from prosecution for illegal possession. But that would then be premised on the understanding that there's no crime associated with that weapon. And so what happens in South Africa is identifying information is required. When you hand in the weapon, obviously the details of the weapon are recorded, and that's critical, and that can happen even in a full amnesty. But the person's name, ID. And that's an enormous challenge.
And that's going to be a deterrent.
And it's a deterrent. But on the other hand, from SAPS, it means it takes away your ability to connect that gun with a crime, and let's say in the event of a murder. And then you have the family behind that murder. So it's a real dilemma, and Gun-Free understands the dilemma. For us, I guess the conversation we're wanting to have with our society and with the minister in particular is, what are the benefits of going that route versus not going that route? And we have examples from Brazil where they went and no questions asked, and over a year they got over 300,000 weapons. This was in 2004, 2005. In Australia, a different situation. It was mainly long guns. In '96, they got over 600,000 weapons handed in. So you need to look at what is your goal. And if your primary goal is to remove illegal weapons from circulation, you need to think of what are the incentives. Compensation might be one, and that's also tricky, but it's done before, and it can, not here in South Africa really. So these are what we call the conditions of the amnesty. There are other things like civilian oversight. Another really important condition from our understanding would be stockpile management. Once those weapons come in, what is the chain of management and control from the moment the weapon is handed in to the moment it's destroyed? So there's some risks, but overwhelmingly, globally and in South Africa, we've done amnesties before, demonstrate that you're talking about, in South Africa in 2005, we removed just over 100,000 weapons. And in 2010, in preparation for FIFA World Cup, just over 30,000. That's a significant amount of guns that you're removing from circulation.
But it's also a significant decline from 2005 to 2010, isn't it? I wonder whether that issue around the no questions asked policy not being implemented blanket, as in no questions asked. You can come in and literally just hand over the gun. I wonder whether that decline from 2005 and 2010 has something to do with that.
It could. It's an interesting thing you're raising, but what we do know is, one is the 2005 was 6 months, and importantly it was coupled with the strengthening and in fact a completely new gun law. So you had a whole range of licensed gun owners who had excess weapons in relation to the new law, which limited the number of weapons any one person could have. So a lot of it was voluntary surrender, and it's a really important aim of an amnesty, is you want people who have licensed weapons or unauthorized deceased estates, you want them to use the amnesty to hand in their weapons. Because if someone doesn't need a gun or want a weapon, it's at risk for theft. So you want it out the house. So that's another important component of amnesty.
But for me, you know, the issue around this amnesty would be, does it appeal to people, for example, you talked about KZN, the Western Cape, Gauteng. If I just think about the Western Cape and the Cape Flats, are those the kinds of situations where people are handing over guns?
No. Not,
so it's not tackling where the problem actually lies?
Well, so the one thing about amnesty is not stand alone. So one of the things amnesty does is once the minister's declared amnesties, it has to be coupled with an increased effort on the part of SAPS to do intelligence-driven operations. And again, that was one of the reasons for the success in 2005. There was an operation called Sotunya. So increased efforts at search and seizure operations. So then we've got 6 months, and we have to significantly increase our efforts. So that means search and seizure, and you have the minister has the right to declare that. So that's a kind of a bit of a stick approach. So you need a carrot approach of how do you enable people who are in illegal possession of weapons, where there's maybe pressure from the community. What we know in Brazil is this kind of weapons were not handed in at cop stations. They were handed in at NGOs. They were disabled at the moment of hand-in. There's stories about like big trommels, and that you can't take the gun out, but where people can just chuck a gun in. In order to do that, you would need a blanket amnesty. And so there might be some compromises, because the other question is, in all the amnesties we've run, which has been 2 or 3, has any weapon that's been recovered during the amnesty ever positively been linked to a crime? As far as we know, not.
Right, I think this is definitely a conversation that will continue until that amnesty comes into play. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you. It is. I think it's complex, and there's going to be some tough choices.
Absolutely. Adele Kirsten is from Gun Free South Africa as we continue to track that story.